Welcome to DeadbearCode. I'm Sean Beyer, and in this video we're going to be going over how to automate a CI/CD pipeline for a serverless FastAPI application. In order to do this, we're going to be using GitHub and CircleCi along with a FastAPI application that we've already prepared. If you want to see how to convert a FastAPI into a Lambda, you can watch this video or follow the link in the description to a repository to get the application already built. I'll be posting a link to the blog version of this video in the video description. So just in case I need to make any updates later, you can go follow that link and go to the blog post, which I'll be able to update over time. First off, a few requirements are going to be you're going to need an AWS account, a GitHub account, and be a little familiar with using Git in your terminal. Now, in this walkthrough, I'm going to assume that you've already set up the necessary AWS resources for your serverless FastAPI. If you already have an application set up that you want to use, that's great. If not, there's an example application here that we can use. In this video, we're going to walk through using the example app, but feel free to use your own if you want. So first, let's go ahead and clone our repository, and then go ahead and CD into that directory. Now we need to check out the starter file branch for our CI/CD. So we're going to run git checkout serverless-fastAPI-CICD-starter. Next, let's go ahead and run the app just to make sure everything is running correctly. So let's go ahead and set up our virtual environment by running virtualenv-p Python. We're going to use version 3.7 env. Then we'll go ahead and activate the virtual environment by running source env/bin/activate. And if we go ahead and open that up in our code editor, you'll see there's a requirements.txt file in here with a few dependencies already in it. So we're going to install those dependencies by running pip install -r requirements.txt. And then let's go ahead and run the app. And then if we go to localhost 8000 in our browser, and our app is working. Great. So if you don't already have your own GitHub repository set up, you're going to want to go ahead and do that right now. Next, we want to go ahead and check out a new branch that we're going to use to sync up our CI/CD pipeline. So every time we commit any changes to this branch in GitHub, it will automatically kick off a new build and run our tests. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to call this one CI/CD-demo-dev. That way we can differentiate it from a development branch versus a production branch. So if you checked out the starter files, you should already have a requirements.txt file in your project. If you don't have one, go ahead and run pip freeze and output to requirements.txt. Now that you have a repository set up and you have your requirements.txt file, it's time to set up the CircleCi project. So if you've never created a CircleCi account before, just go ahead and log in. And it's going to prompt you to log in with either GitHub or Bitbucket. In this case, we're using GitHub, so we're just going to go ahead and log in with that. Then it's automatically going to prompt you with every GitHub repository that your GitHub account has access to. So in this case, you just want to find whichever one you created your repository in. Next, you're going to land on the projects page. And if you didn't for whatever reason, you can get here by clicking this little icon here over on the left. And this is going to show you every repository that you have access to on that GitHub account as well. You'll see this is the one that we created for this project, and you're going to want to go ahead and click Setup Project. Now, if for whatever reason you don't see that repository showing up, you may need to allow access for CircleCi to access your repository. And in that case, you can come into your settings of your GitHub account under third-party access, and this is where you can manage what you're going to allow CircleCi to do. It'll initially prompt you with this default config file, but we're going to go ahead and click Use Existing Config. It's going to prompt you, if you've already added one, you can start building your project. Now, we haven't done this yet, but we're going to go ahead and click Start Building anyways, just to kick it off, and then we're going to add the config file here in a moment. So this will kick off a new build, which is going to fail, and that's okay because we expected it to because we haven't added our config file yet. If you want to just go ahead and see the finished config.yaml, you can find that by checking out the serverless-fastAPI-CICD-final branch, and that'll have the end product, which we'll get to by the end of this walkthrough. So let's go back to our code editor, and we're going to add a new folder called .circleci. And then we're going to add in a config.yaml. So to start off, we're just going to define our workflow and one job to have it run and see if we can get that running. First, we need to declare which version of CircleCi we're going to use, which is going to be 2.1 at the time of this video. So next, we're going to go ahead and declare our orb, and we're going to call this one Python, and it's going to be we're just going to use this name right here, Next, we're going to declare our first job, and we're going to call this build and test. And now we need to add an executor. On our executor, we're going to pass in a name key and call it Python/default. And then we're going to pass in the tag 3.7 to tell it that we want to use version 3.7 Python. Next, we're going to go ahead and add our steps. The first one is going to be this checkout step, which is a built-in shorthand from CircleCi, where it checks out the repository of the branch that you set up to kick off these builds with. Next, we're going to create our own step, and we're going to call this setup virtual env. And we do that by adding this run key here, and we can pass it a name as well as the command that we want CircleCi to run in order to perform this task. So in this case, we're going to add this pipe here, which allows us to add multiple commands to be performed one after the other within CircleCi. The first one is going to be our virtual env-p Python 3.7 env, and this is just to set up our virtual environment exactly like how we set it up on our local machine, but we're just doing the same thing in CircleCi. And just how we had to activate our virtual environment on our local machine, we have to do the same thing here in CircleCi. However, each step that runs in CircleCi will create a new session of a terminal. And so your virtual environment won't be activated on consecutive steps unless you explicitly reactivate it again in each step. To avoid doing that, we can edit our .bashrc file that each step is using in order to have it automatically be activated on each step. And to do that, we're going to modify this command. We're going to say echo and put this into a string and append it to our bash env. So CircleCi has this alias called bash_env, all caps, that is an alias to the .bashrc file that every step is using. So now if we run another command here, and we're going to call this one install dependencies, now we can just say pip install -r requirements.txt, and these dependencies will be put into our virtual environment folder and not into the root of our project. Okay, so simple enough. In this job, we're just gonna set up the virtual environment and install our dependencies. So now if we check this into GitHub, nothing's gonna happen because we haven't defined the workflow. So the workflow is the kickoff point for all of these jobs to run. So let's go ahead and define this, and we'll call this build, test, and deploy. And then we want to declare which jobs this workflow is going to run, and it's going to run our build and test. And we only want this to run whenever we make changes to our CI/CD-demo-dev branch. So in order to do that, we can add filters, and this one is going to be branches, and we're going to say only on CI/CD demo-dev. Awesome. Let's go ahead and check this into Git. Now, if we come back to CircleCi, it kicked off our build, test, and deploy workflow and our build and test job, and it was successful. Great. Now that we have our build working, let's go ahead and automate our tests. And to do this, we're going to be using FastAPI's ability to run PyTests directly by kind of going through these steps here and importing their test client. If you want to read more up on testing in FastAPI, I suggest coming over the documentation here. It has some nice walkthroughs that go more in depth on how to set up tests. So coming back to our terminal, I'm going to run pip install pytest. And then we also want to remember to add this to our requirements.txt file. So we can do that by running pip freeze again out to our requirements.txt. Next, we want to come back to our code editor, and in the app folder, we are going to add another folder called tests, and then a file called test_main.py. And this is going to be our test file that's going to test this main.py file, and we're going to write one simple test to test this one route here. And then we also are going to want to add a init.py file into our test folder. So here on line 1, we're importing the test client. Then we're also importing the app from our main.py file, instantiating the client, and then we are calling our test here. In this case, it's just going to hit this / and it's testing that it says hello world. So let's go ahead and try this out locally just to be sure that it's running correctly. And great, that passed. And let's go ahead and add that to our config.yaml. And we're going to call this test. And just like in our terminal, we're just going to have it run pytest. And that should be it. Let's go ahead and commit these changes. Come back to CircleCi. We'll see our workflow has kicked off. And awesome. Now that we have our tests automated and they're running successfully, we need to deploy our new code to AWS Lambda. In order to do that, we have to tell CircleCi to package the Lambda by creating a zip file. So we're going to add 2 more steps. This first step here is going to change directories into this site packages folder within our virtual environment folder. And then we're going to run this zip command with the path back to the root of the project. And this dot is going to say everything that's in the current directory that we're in, put it in that function.zip file. Then we need to add the app folder that contains our API into that same function.zip file. So we have both the dependencies and the API all in one zip file. Now, just like before, let's go ahead and commit these changes and make sure our workflow is still succeeding before moving on. Great, so that succeeded and our zip file has been created, and you can come in here and see that our FastAPI dependencies were put in there, as well as adding in our API code. So CircleCi has a few tools that you can use to access information across workspaces and jobs, and those are caches, workspaces, and artifacts. Caches will allow you to access the same information across multiple workflows, while workspaces will allow you to access the same information across multiple jobs downstream. Where artifacts are where you can output a file that you might need to download or do something with after the workspace has completed. In our case, we want to use a workspace because we're trying to access the function.zip file within the same workflow but across multiple jobs, and we don't need to store it afterwards because we're going to be uploading it to AWS within the workflow. So in order to set this up, we'll come back to our config file and we're going to add this command here, persist to workspace. And this is a built-in CircleCi method where we're telling it to look in the root of the container, and then the path is going to be the name of the file that we are persisting to this workspace. Now we can go ahead and build out our second job. And so we have a few new things going on here. One you can see is our executor is different, and that is because we want this orb that is going to have the AWS CLI pre-installed. So we also need to make sure that we go ahead and add that up here in our orbs. Next, you'll see we're attaching the workspace that we persisted to in the previous job, so that way we have access to that function.zip file. And this orb comes with this setup method that allows us to configure our AWS credentials within the environment inside CircleCi, which we'll cover in just a moment. Next, we're going to upload to S3, and we're using the AWS CLI to upload our function.zip. And then this is going to be the name of our S3 bucket containing the Lambda. So for the sake of this demo, mine is going to be CICD-test-1. So I'm going to go ahead and update this. And then same thing with the Lambda. You want to take the name of the Lambda and then update this S3 bucket name here as well. So finally, then we're running this command to deploy the new Lambda, which is using the CLI to run the update function code on Lambda. And we're specifying the name of the function and the name of the S3 bucket with the file that we want to update the Lambda with. And then finally, we want to update our workflow and add in this new job. And on this one, we're going to add a new flag that's going to say requires build and test. This is saying in this workflow, we're only going to run the deployed dev job if this build and test job passes successfully. And then we're going to also add our filter. Now we need to configure our AWS credentials in CircleCi. And to do this, we're going to create a new user and give it only programmatic access and only the permissions it needs in order to update this Lambda. To do that, let's head over to the AWS console, and we're going to go to the Identity and Access Management, click on Users, and then Add User. And I'm going to call this CI/CD Demo User. I'm going to only give it programmatic access. Click Next Permissions, and then here we want to directly attach a custom policy directly. So we're going to click Attach Existing Policies Directly. Then we're going to go and create a new policy. Then click the JSON tab, and I'm going to go ahead and just paste this snippet in here. Every statement object in a policy is going to have an action, an effect, and a resource. And the first statement here, we're granting this user the permission to perform the actions of deleting, getting, and putting an object in S3. And here we're saying we're going to allow those actions. And then this is the resource that we're going to allow those actions on. So we're going to go back to our S3 bucket. If we check this box here, we can see this button here that says copy bucket ARN. And if we come back to the policy, we can paste that ARN right there. And then you want to make sure you have this /* that's going to allow you to perform these actions on any item inside that bucket. In the next object, we are granting the permission to update the Lambda function. And then same thing, we need to get the ARN of our Lambda. So let's go ahead and grab that. If you come back to Lambda, you'll see the ARN up here in the top right corner. Go ahead and copy that. And then click Review Policy. Go ahead and give it a name and create policy. Now, if we come back to our permissions on our new user and we refresh this table here, we should be able to search for our new policy, which is this one here, and hit Next Tags. Here you can add any sort of tags you want on the policy and then create user. And you'll be shown these keys here. You'll want to go ahead and save these somewhere safe because they won't show you this secret access key again. If you do lose them, it's not a big deal. You can come back in here, click on the user, go to security credentials, and click create access key. You can also make this inactive and delete it if it gets compromised. Now that we have our user created with the correct permissions, we need to configure this in CircleCi. So if you come back to CircleCi and go to Organization Settings, you'll see that CircleCi has this feature called Contexts. And contexts allow you to assign environment variables on an organization-wide level within the defined context. So I can access these contexts across any projects in my organization or my GitHub account. And so we're going to go ahead and create a context. And I'm going to call this CICD-demo-dev. And then go ahead and click Create Context. And if we go into that context now, we're going to add in our AWS credentials. First, we want the AWS access key ID and then the secret access key. And these keys have to be exactly this way, all caps with underscores in order for our orb to work correctly. And finally, a default region. And this is going to be whichever region you provision your resources in, which you can find out by looking up in the top right corner on whichever resources dashboard you're in. In my case, it's US-East-1. And finally, we need to come back to our workflow, and under each job, we need to specify which context that we want to use. So we're going to add these for both of these jobs. Great. Now let's go ahead and commit our changes to our code. Now, if you click on this workflow, you'll see you now have two jobs. First, the build and test job is going to run, and then if that's successful, it'll then run the deployed dev job. And great, that was successfully deployed. So now if we come into our API gateway, come to stages, click on our dev stage, click on this invoke URL, and you'll see that our app is deployed. So if we go ahead and make a change, so if we come into the main.py and we change this to CI/CD successful, and go ahead and commit those changes. And as you can see, it failed. And that's because I changed the message that we had wrote the test to. And this is the beauty of automating your integration, because you'll immediately get notified of any changes that are going to break the code. And so let's go ahead and update that test. Great, that's deployed. So now if we go back to our API gateway and invoke the URL again, you'll see that our change was automatically deployed. Finally, you're going to want some sort of a plan on how to handle environment variables and or sensitive credentials you don't want to check into Git throughout your CI/CD pipeline. There are a lot of different ways that you can handle this. We'll be using the pretty straightforward method of a .env file combined with CircleCi's contexts. And if you come over to the FastAPI documentation, they recommend using a package called python-env in order to make this work. And so that's what we're going to go ahead and use. So back in our terminal, we're going to pip install python-env. And then again, we're going to add this to our requirements.txt file. Inside the app directory, we're going to create a new folder and call it core. and we're going to add in init.py as well as another file called config.py. And we're going to add this snippet here. And out of the box, FastAPI comes with Pydantic, which is used for data validation. And you can declare this settings class here and call out the types and names of your environment variables here. And then here on line 9, we're creating a subclass called config and importing these values from the .env file. You can see we have 2 environment variables here. One called prefix, which we've set to default to this string of /API/v1, and then another one called secret key that is a string, but we're not giving it a default value. So next we need to add our .env file. So in our .env file, we need to give that one a value, otherwise it will come in as none. You'll notice here in the .env we're using this all caps with an underscore, and this will automatically be mapped to these lowercase ones that we'll be able to call on, which we'll do here in a second. So if we come back to our main.py, now we're going to want to import our new config file. Then we're going to update this message to pass in our new fake secret key here. And then we're also going to update this prefix. Then let's go back and run our application. And you can see now we're getting our secret value passed in through the .env file. Now we need to come back to our context in CircleCi and add in our secret key. And then we also need to update our config file. And we're going to add in this step here, which is going to output this env object into a new .env file. CircleCi will map all of the environment variables we put in our context into this env object. Then we also need to come down to our add app to zip file step, and we're going to add in the .env file to add into our package Lambda as well as the app. Finally, we are going to update our test. It's going to say this is our secret key, secret value. So let's go ahead and commit these changes. Great, and that's successfully deployed. If we go ahead and invoke our API, you'll see our environment variables are updating. Awesome, we've successfully set up our Serverless FastAPI CI/CD pipeline with CircleCi and Github. This was a way how I figured out how to get this to work. If you have any other cool ideas or tips, go ahead and let me know in the comments. And if you found this video helpful, do me a favor and leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more coding tutorials in the future. Thanks, see you next time.